Welcome to our channel. Okinawa, Japan, April 1945. The ruins stretched endlessly. Under the gray morning sky, a landscape of shattered concrete and twisted metal that had once been a thriving neighborhood. Sergeant James Mitchell, 26 years old from Iowa, stepped carefully through the debris. His rifle lowered but ready, the battle for Okinawa had moved north 3 days ago, leaving behind only silence and dust. Sarge. You hear that? Private Danny Torres whispered, his young face tense beneath the helmet. James stopped at first. Nothing. Then a sound that made his blood run cold, a baby's cry, weak and desperate, cutting through the stillness like a knife. Over there, James pointed toward a collapsed building, its walls leaning at impossible angles. They moved quickly, boots crunching on broken glass. The crying grew louder, more urgent. James' heart pounded, not from fear of enemy fire, but from something he couldn't name. He'd been trained to fight soldiers, not to face this. Jesus Christ, and he breathed as they rounded a pile of rubble. 3 infants lay in a makeshift shelter formed by fallen beams, their faces red from crying, their tiny fists waving helplessly. The oldest couldn't have been more than 8 months. Beside them, partially covered by debris, lay a woman's hand, still lifeless. James knelt down, his rifle, forgotten, on the ground. The nearest baby, a girl with wisps of black hair, locked eyes with him. Her crying stopped for a moment, replaced by a look of pure confusion. "What do we do?" Annie asked, his voice cracking. "Orders, say we secure the area and move on." James reached out slowly, his calloused hand trembling as he touched the baby's cheek. She was burning with fever. "Orders don't cover this," James said quietly. "Sarge, we can't." Annie started. "Can't what?" James snapped, turning to face him. "Leave them here to die." The question hung in the air between them. James thought of his own daughter back home, Sarah, who'd be about this age now. He'd left when she was 2 weeks old, hadn't held her in over a year. The weight of that absence pressed down on him like the rubble surrounding them. "Command won't allow it," Annie insisted. "These are enemy civilians. We have protocols." James picked up the feverish baby girl, cradling her awkwardly against his chest. She whimpered, then settled against his uniform. "Then I guess I'm breaking protocol," he said. But even as he spoke, James knew the real problem wasn't protocol. It was the secret he'd been carrying since landing on this island, a secret that made saving these children both his redemption and his damnation. The makeshift field hospital buzzed with controlled chaos, medics rushing between costs, the smell of antiseptic mixing with blood and sweat. Captain Robert Hayes stood at the entrance of the medical tent, his arms crossed, his jaw set in a hard line. "Absolutely not, Sergeant Hayes," said his voice sharp enough to cut steel. "You will return those children to the civilian collection point immediately." James stood at attention, the baby girl still in his arms. Behind him, Annie held the other 2 infants, looking like he wanted to disappear into the ground. "Sir, the collection point is 20 m south and these babies need medical attention now," James argued, keeping his voice steady. "The girl has a fever of at least 103. The boy has a wound on his leg that's infected. That's not our concern," Hayes replied coldly. "We're soldiers, not a damn orphanage." A nurse, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, appeared beside them, her dark eyes flashing with anger. "Captain, with respect, these infants won't survive the transport without immediate treatment." Hayes turned his glare on her. "Lieutenant, you're dismissed." "No, sir, I'm not," Sarah said firmly. She reached for the baby in James's arms. "Medical decisions fall under my jurisdiction. In this tent, these children are now my patients." The tension crackled like electricity. James watched Hayes's face turn red, saw the vein pulsing in his temple, but Sarah didn't flinch. "You're making a mistake, Lieutenant," Hayes said slowly, "both of you." He turned and walked away, his boots heavy on the wooden planks. Sarah took the baby girl, gently examining her with practiced efficiency. "Get them on CS3, 4, and 5, she ordered. "I need clean water formula, if we have any, and antibiotics." "Thank you," James said quietly. Sarah looked up at him and something passed between them, an understanding maybe, or a shared burden. "Don't thank me yet, Sergeant. You just made an enemy of the captain and something tells me there's more to this story than you're saying." She was right. James had saved these babies, but not purely from compassion. 3 weeks ago, during the initial assault, he'd made a choice, a terrible, necessary choice that had saved his platoon but cost civilian lives. He'd called an artillery on a building he'd been told was clear, but it wasn't. The scream still haunted his sleep. These 3 babies couldn't erase that sin, but maybe, just maybe, they could balance the scales. "What are their names?" Sarah asked, wrapping the girl in a clean blanket. "I don't know," James admitted. "Then we'll have to give them names," she said. "This one." She held up the girl. "She's a fighter. Let's call her Hope." James nodded, but the word felt like ash in his mouth. Hope, could there be hope for someone like him? The baby Hope grabbed his finger with surprising strength and for a moment James let himself believe it was possible. Before we discover what happened next, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. These stories of humanity in the darkest times connect us all, across borders and generations. We love to know where our dear viewers are keeping these memories alive. 3 days passed. The baby survived barely. Hope's fever broke on the second night and James had stayed by her cot the entire time, watching her tiny chest rise and fall terrified. Each breath might be her last. Now he sat outside the medical tent in the pale dawn light, exhausted, his uniform stained with formula and worse. Annie approached with 2 cups of coffee, his face grim. "You look like hell, Sarge," Annie said, handing him a cup. "Feel worse," James muttered. The coffee was bitter and lukewarm, but he drank it anyway. "Captain Hayes has been asking questions," Annie said carefully, "about you." "About that night 3 weeks ago," James's hand tightened on the cup. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he knows something." Annie sat down beside him. "Sarge, what really happened that night when you called in the strike on that building?" The question James had been dreading. He stared at the horizon where the sun was just beginning to paint the sky pink and gold, beautiful and terrible, like everything in this war. "I was told. It was clear," James said slowly. "Intelligence said it was an enemy position, but when the shells hit he closed his eyes. I heard them civilians screaming, 'Jesus,'" Danny whispered. "I killed them, Danny, maybe a dozen people, maybe more," James's voice cracked. "And I can't take it back. I can't." "So that's why you saved the babies," Annie said. "You're trying to make up for it." "Doesn't work that way, does it?" James laughed bitterly. 3 lives don't balance 12 deaths. Math doesn't add up. Sarah emerged from the tent, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked between them, sensing the tension. "Sergeant Mitchell, we have a problem," she said. "Captain Hayes has ordered the children transferred to the civilian collection point today, in 2 hours. "They're not ready," James protested, standing up. "Hope still needs." "I know," Sarah interrupted. "But Hayes has made it official. He's even arranged for a truck." She paused, her expression troubled. "And he's assigned you to escort them personally." James felt the trap closing. Hayes knew somehow. He knew about that night and this was his revenge, forcing James to hand over the children he'd saved, making him complicit in their likely deaths. "There's something else," Sarah continued quietly. "I overheard Hayes talking to another officer. He said something about justice for war crimes and making an example." The words hit James like a physical blow. War crimes, court, martial, execution. "What are you going to do?" Danny asked. James looked at the medical tent where 3 babies slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around them. He thought of his daughter, Sarah, back home, of the man he'd been before this war, of the man he might never be again. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I've got 2 hours to figure it out." And at that moment James Mitchell realized that saving those babies might cost him everything, his career, his freedom, maybe even his life. The truck arrived exactly on schedule, its engine rumbling like distant thunder. James stood beside it, the 3 babies wrapped in blankets and placed in a wooden crate lined with cloth. Hope looked up at him with those dark, trusting eyes, and something inside him shattered. Captain Hayes approached, his expression triumphant. "Ready to move out, Sergeant?" "Yes, sir," James said mechanically. "Good." Hayes leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know what you did, Mitchell. That building you destroyed. My intelligence officer confirmed, there were civilians inside. You're a murderer, and when you get back from this little errand you're going to face a court-martial." James's blood turned to ice. "Sir, I save it." "Hayes, cut him off, get those enemy brats out of my camp, and Mitchell, don't come back expecting mercy." Hayes walked away, leaving James standing beside the truck, his world collapsing. "Sarge." Dandy's voice, urgent and low, "Don't get in that truck." "What I said, don't get in that truck." And he moved closer, his eyes intense. "I've been talking to some of the other guys. We know what Hayes is doing. He's setting you up. I can't just yes, you can." Sarah's voice came from behind them. She approached quickly, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "The collection point is a death sentence for those babies, no food, no medicine, no care. They'll be dead in a week." "What are you suggesting?" James asked, though part of him already knew. Sarah pulled a folded map from her pocket. "There's a Catholic mission, 15 miles east, French nuns who've been helping civilians. They'll take the babies, care for them properly." "That's desertion," James said flatly. "They'll hunt me down." "Maybe," Annie said, "or maybe in all this chaos, 1 sergeant and 3 babies just get lost in the shuffle. War's almost over anyway. Sarge, Japan's finished." James looked at the babies, then at his friends, then at the camp where Captain Hayes stood watching from a distance, waiting for him to comply, to break. To accept his fate. "If I do this," James said slowly, "I can never go home, never see my daughter again. They'll brand me a deserter, a traitor. If you don't do this," Sarah counted, "those babies die and you face a firing squad. Anyway, at least this way someone lives." The choice crystallized in James's mind with terrible clarity: his old life, his daughter, his home, his honor weighed against 3 tiny lives that depended entirely on him. Hope made a small sound, her hand reaching toward him. James picked her up, cradling her against his chest. "Danny, you're going to tell Hayes." The truck broke down 5 miles out. "Bought me some time, already planned on it." Annie grinned. "Sarah, I need supplies, formula, medicine, whatever you can spare, already packed," she said, producing a canvas bag. "And, Mitchell, you're doing the right thing." James wasn't sure about that, but as he climbed into the truck with 3 babies and a map to a mission he'd never seen, he knew one thing. With absolute certainty, there was no going back. The engine roared to life and James Mitchell drove away from everything he'd ever known toward a future as uncertain as the babies sleeping beside him. The road stretched endlessly through devastated countryside, past burned villages and abandoned rice fields. James drove with one hand on the wheel, the other steadying the crate of babies beside him. Hope had fallen asleep, but the 2 boys James had started calling them Michael and Thomas in his mind whimpered softly, hungry again. He'd been driving for 2 hours when he saw the roadblock. 3 American soldiers stood across the road, their rifles raised. James's heart hammered against his ribs as he slowed the truck to a stop. "Identification," the lead soldier barked. He was young, maybe 19, with nervous eyes that darted between James and the truck bed. James handed over his papers, keeping his expression neutral. Sergeant James Mitchell transporting civilians to the collection point. The soldier examined the documents, then peered into the truck. His eyes widened when he saw the babies. "Those are babies," he said, his voice tight, with suspicion. "Orphans," James corrected. "Found them in the rubble. Orders are to transport them south." The second soldier stepped forward, older, with sergeant stripes. "Collection point is southwest, not east." "Where exactly are you headed, Sergeant?" James's mind raced. The lie had to be perfect, had to be believable. Alternative route, main road's been compromised by holdout snipers. Captain Hayes authorized the detour. The older sergeant's eyes narrowed. "Hayes, let me radio that in. No need." James said quickly, too quickly. "We're on a tight schedule. Those babies need medical attention." "Then you won't mind waiting 5 minutes while I confirm," the sergeant said, reaching for his radio. James's hand moved to his sidearm, not to draw it, just to feel its weight, to know it was there. Could he shoot fellow Americans? Could he become that person? Hope chose that moment to wake up, her cry piercing the tense silence. The sound was so pure, so helpless, that all three soldiers turned toward it instinctively. "Please, James," said his voice raw with desperation, "just let me through. Those babies have been through hell. They don't deserve to die because of paperwork." The young soldier lowered his rifle slightly. "Sarge, maybe we should shut it private." The older sergeant snapped, but his hand had moved away from the radio. He stared at James for a long moment, and something passed between them, an understanding born of too many horrors witnessed, too many impossible choices made. "You got 10 seconds to disappear, Mitchell," the sergeant said quietly. "After that I'm radioing this in, and if anyone asks, we never saw you." "Why?" James asked, stunned. The sergeant's face hardened. "Because I got kids back home too, and because this war's made us do enough terrible things. Maybe it's time we did something decent." He paused. "Now get the hell out of here before I change my mind." James didn't need to be told twice. He gunned the engine, the truck lurching forward. In the rearview mirror he watched the three soldiers grow smaller, then disappear around a bend. His hands were shaking so badly he had to pull over. He sat there for 5 minutes, breathing hard, while the babies fussed in their crate. That had been too close, and it wouldn't be the last checkpoint. James pulled out Sarah's map, studying it in the fading afternoon light. The mission was still 8 miles away through increasingly dangerous territory. Japanese holdouts were rumored to be in these hills, desperate men who refused to surrender even as their empire crumbled. "We're going to make it," James whispered to the babies, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. "I promise you we're going to make it." But promises, he'd learned, were easy to make and hard to keep, especially in war. He started the truck again and drove deeper into the unknown. 3 tiny lives, depending on a man who'd already failed so many others. The sun was setting, painting the sky the color of blood and fire, and James Mitchell wondered if he'd live to see another dawn. Darkness fell like a curtain, absolute and suffocating. James had been forced to abandon the truck 3 miles back when the road became impossible, choked with debris from a collapsed bridge. Now he walked through the night carrying the crate of babies. Every shadow, a potential threat. Michael wouldn't stop crying. The sound echoed through the silent hills, a beacon for anyone listening. James had tried everything, rocking him, checking for injuries, offering formula, but nothing worked. The baby's cries grew more desperate, more anguished. "Please, buddy, please," James whispered, his voice cracking. "You've got to be quiet." A sound behind him, footsteps. James spun around, his hand flying to his pistol. A figure emerged from the darkness, an old Japanese man, thin as a skeleton, his clothes hanging in rags. He held no weapon, just his empty hands raised in a gesture of peace. "American," the man said in broken English. "You help." Every instinct screamed at James to run, to shoot, to protect the babies. But something in the old man's eyes, a desperate sadness that mirrored his own, made him pause. "I don't want trouble," James said carefully, keeping his pistol drawn. The old man pointed at Michael, still crying, "Baby sick, I help, please." "How do I know you won't my grandchildren?" The old man interrupted, his voice breaking, "All dead, bombs, fire, all dead." Tears streamed down his weathered face. "Please let me help one child, just one." James stood frozen, caught between fear and compassion. This man was supposed to be his enemy. But looking at him, this broken grandfather who'd lost everything, James saw only another human being drowning in grief. "Okay," James said slowly, lowering his pistol. "Okay." The old man approached carefully, his movements gentle. As he examined Michael, he made soft clicking sounds. Then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth pouch. "Medic," he explained, "for stomach. Baby have pain here." He touched Michael's belly gently. James watched as the old man mixed a tiny amount of powder with water and carefully fed it to Michael. Within minutes, the baby's crying subsided, replaced by soft, sleepy sounds. "Thank you," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," the old man nodded, then pointed east. "Mission, 2 kilometer, that way." But he hesitated, his expression troubled. "But what soldiers?" "Japanese soldiers, hiding in hills. They see, American they." He made a shooting gesture. "I have to try," James said. "These babies need help." The old man studied him for a long moment, then reached up and removed a small wooden pendant from around his neck. He pressed it into James's hand. "Protection," he said, "for my wife, she is also dead." His voice broke again, "You, good man, save children. Buddha, protect, good man." James looked at the pendant, a simple carved figure worn smooth by years of handling. "I can't take this, you must." The old man insisted, "For babies, for Hope." He touched Hope's cheek gently and the baby girl smiled in her sleep. Then, without another word, the old man turned and disappeared back into the darkness, leaving James alone with 3 babies and a pendant that felt impossibly heavy in his palm. James stood there for a moment, overwhelmed by the strange mercy he'd just received. In the middle of war, in the heart of enemy territory, a grieving grandfather had shown him more kindness than his own commanding officer. "Come on," James whispered to the sleeping babies, "let's finish this." He adjusted the crate and started walking again, the pendant clutched in his fist like a talisman. 2 kilometers, he could do 2 kilometers. But as he crested the next hill, James saw something that made his blood run cold. In the valley below, illuminated by moonlight, stood the mission, a small compound of white buildings surrounding a chapel with a cross on top, and surrounding the mission. Camped in the shadows, where at least 20 Japanese soldiers die. James crouched behind a boulder, his mind racing through impossible calculations. 20 soldiers, 3 babies, 1 exhausted American sergeant with a pistol and maybe 6 rounds left. The math was brutal and simple. He couldn't win, but he couldn't turn back either. Michael needed proper medical care. Hope's fever could return. Thomas had developed a cough that worried James deeply. The mission was their only chance. He studied the compound through the darkness. The Japanese soldiers seemed to be watching the mission, not attacking it. Why? What were they waiting for? A twig snapped behind him. James whirled, pistol raised, and found himself staring at a young Japanese soldier, no more than 17. His rifle pointed directly at James's chest. For a frozen moment, neither moved. The soldier's hands trembled on his rifle. His eyes were wide with fear and exhaustion, and James realized with a shock that this boy was just as terrified as he was. "Please," James whispered, though he knew the soldier probably didn't understand English. "Please, don't. The soldier's eyes dropped to the crate of babies. Hope stirred, making a small sound. The soldier's expression changed. Confusion. Then something softer, recognition, maybe humanity. Kokomo, the soldier whispered, children. He lowered his rifle slowly, then put a finger to his lips in a universal gesture, be quiet. He pointed at the mission, then at the other soldiers. Then made a cutting motion across his throat. James understood the other soldiers would kill him on sight, but this boy, this enemy soldier, was giving him a chance. The young soldier gestured for James to follow, then began moving carefully down the hillside, staying in the shadows. James hesitated for only a second before following the crate of babies held tight against his chest. They moved in silence through the darkness, the soldier leading James on a winding path that avoided the other Japanese positions. Twice they had to freeze as patrols passed nearby so close. James could hear their whispered conversations. Finally, they reached the back wall of the mission compound. The soldier pointed to a small gate, partially hidden by overgrown vines. "Arigato," James whispered. "Thank you," one of the few Japanese words he knew. The soldier nodded, then did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph, a family portrait, creased and faded, a young woman holding a baby, his wife and child. James realized Spinda, the soldier said softly, touching the photograph, dead. James felt tears burning his eyes. He pulled out his own wallet, showing the soldier the picture of his daughter, Sarah, the one he'd been carrying since he left home. "Sarah," James said, "my daughter." The soldier looked at the photograph, then at the babies in the crate, then back at James. Something passed between them, an understanding that transcended language, nationality, war itself. They were both fathers, both trying to protect children in a world determined to destroy them. The soldier bowed slightly, then gestured urgently toward the gate. Time was running out. James moved to the gate, testing it gently. It opened with a soft creak. He turned back to thank the soldier again, but the boy had already disappeared into the shadows. James slipped through the gate into the mission compound, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He'd made it against all odds, through checkpoints and darkness and enemy soldiers. He'd actually made it. The mission courtyard was quiet, lit by a single lantern hanging near the chapel door. James walked toward it each step, feeling surreal, dreamlike. The chapel door opened, and a nun emerged, elderly, French, her face lined with years of service and suffering. She looked at James, then at the babies, and her expression transformed from suspicion to compassion in an instant. "Module," she whispered. "The children, please," James said, his voice breaking. "Please help them, they need." He didn't get to finish. His legs gave out, exhaustion and relief overwhelming him all at once. The nun caught him, surprisingly strong for her age, and called out in rapid French. More nuns appeared, taking the babies gently, coupling over them in soft voices. James tried to stand to explain, but the world was spinning. "Rest, my son," the elderly nun said in accented English. "You are safe now. The children are safe." Safe, the word felt foreign, impossible, but as James's vision blurred and darkness claimed him, he allowed himself to believe it's just for a moment. He'd done it, he'd saved them. Subscribe and share this story to keep these forgotten moments of humanity alive. History remembers the battles, but we remember the hearts that refuse to surrender to hate. B. James woke to sunlight streaming through a window and the sound of babies laughing. For a disoriented moment he couldn't remember where he was or how he'd gotten there. Then it all came flooding back, the escape, the checkpoint, the old Japanese man, the young soldier who'd spared his life. He sat up slowly, his body aching from the journey. He was in a small room, clean and simple, with a wooden cross on the wall. Through the window he could see the mission courtyard where several nuns were tending to a small garden. The door opened and the elderly nun from last night entered carrying a tray with bread and tea. "Good morning," Sergeant Mitchell. She said warmly, I am Sister Marie. You slept for 14 hours. The babies James started are thriving. Sister Marie assured him we have examined them thoroughly. The girl Hope, you called her. Her fever is completely gone. The boys are eating well and gaining strength. You saved their lives. James felt something break inside him, relief so profound it hurt. Thank you, he managed. Thank you for taking them. Sister Marie sat down beside him, her eyes kind but penetrating. Now, Sergeant, you must tell me the truth. Why did an American soldier risk everything to bring 3 Japanese babies to our mission? And why are there Japanese soldiers surrounding us watching and waiting? James took a deep breath and told her everything, the building he destroyed, the civilians he'd killed, Captain Hayes's threats, the impossible choice he'd made. He held nothing back, letting the truth pour out like poison from a wound. When he finished, Sister Marie was quiet for a long moment. You carry a heavy burden, she finally said, the weight of lives taken and lives saved. But I must tell you something, Sergeant, something you need to hear. What those Japanese soldiers outside? They are not here to attack us. They are here because of their commander, Captain Tease-High Yamamoto. He lost his entire family in the American bombing of Tokyo. His wife, his 3 children, his parents all gone in one night. James felt sick. I don't understand. What does that have to do with? Captain Yamamoto knows about the babies, Sister Marie continued. One of his soldiers, a young man who helped you last night, told him, and do you know what Captain Yamamoto said? James shook his head, unable to speak. He said that if one American soldier could risk everything to save 3 Japanese children, then perhaps there is still hope for humanity. He has ordered his men to protect this mission, to ensure no harm comes to the babies you saved. Sister Marie's eyes glistened with tears. You see, Sergeant, your act of mercy has created a ripple. Even in the darkest waters, one stone can create waves. James couldn't process it. The enemy commander, a man who had every reason to hate Americans, was protecting the mission because of what James had done. There's more, Sister Marie said gently. A message came through this morning. The war is ending. Japan is preparing to surrender. In a few weeks, maybe days, this will all be over. The word seemed impossible after years of death and destruction. Could it really just end? What happens to me? James asked quietly. I'm a deserter. When the army finds me, if they find you. Sister Marie corrected. The war is chaos, sergeant records are lost, men go missing, stories change. Perhaps Sergeant James Mitchell died heroically in the final days of the war? Perhaps he never made it to that collection point? Who can say? James stared at her. You're suggesting I disappear, start over. I am suggesting, Sister Marie said carefully, that you have a choice. You can return to face a court-martial for crimes you committed in the fog of war, or you can stay here, help us rebuild, care for the children you saved. We need good men, sergeant, men who understand the cost of violence and choose mercy instead. But my daughter, James, whispered Sarah back home. I'd never see her again. That is the price, Sister Marie acknowledged, and only you can decide if it's one you're willing to pay. But consider this, what kind of father would you be if you returned? A man broken by guilt, possibly imprisoned or executed? Or would Sarah be better served knowing her father died doing something noble, saving innocent lives? The question tore James apart. He thought of Sarah's face, the way she'd looked at him the day he left, too young to understand but old enough to sense his fear. He thought of the man he'd been then, full of patriotic certainty, and the man he was now, hollowed out by war and impossible choices. I need time, James said finally, of course. Sister Marie stood. Come meet the children you saved. Perhaps they will help you decide. She led him to a sunny room where Hope, Michael and Thomas lay on clean blankets, surrounded by nuns who cooed and played with them. Hope saw James and immediately reached for him, her face breaking into a wide smile. James picked her up, and she grabbed his finger with that same fierce grip. And at that moment James Mitchell understood what he had to.